Hello, my name is Stacy Brugnolo. I read Mi Voz Mi Vida for my memoir, memory, and mastery project. This specifically is a book about Latino college students telling their life stories, and it was edited by Andrew Gerard, Robert Kilkenny, and Christina Gomez. Specifically, when you're looking at the course objectives, you can see as a reader how culture affects learning and achievement through their stories that they tell. And one of the major themes that we'll uncover throughout this presentation is how these particular students are able to embrace their cultures even in the face of adversity. This book focuses on the voices and lives of 15 Latino students who attended and graduated from Dartmouth College. In their stories, the reader learns about the trials and tribulations these students had to deal with regarding being Latino in a country where people often made assumptions about them and their cultures. Some of the students, as young adults, neglected to identify with their cultures while attending mostly all-white schools because they feared being treated differently. Although this was true of many of the students, some of them shared how they came to embrace their culture as adults in their freshman year of college. Toward the end of the book, one particular student, Norma Andrade, spoke about her brother's change when he attended college and became the first in their family to do this. And she really does a nice job of summing up how her brother changes from the time that she grew up with him to the time that he went to college. And this is really the truth of many of the stories of the students who are in this book. She wrote this particular quote within the book, and she said once, she saw her brother come back from college, his experience allowed the cultural and ethnic traits that had been absent during his early life to finally be born. This particular quote, again, connects to all of the students in this book, and we certainly see how their lives are changed as a result of embracing their cultures, even if it is later in their lives when they actually go to college. And you'll also come to realize that each student has something that helps them overcome their adversity, and when they're able to come to terms with their culture, they're able to recognize how resilient they are. They're able to see that biculturalism is something they should embrace. They also see that there were certain mentors in their life that changed their lives forever, and ultimately they were able to identify with themselves and see the importance of embracing their cultures. The first story that I wanted to talk about was Eric Martinez, and he was the one student who was able to overcome the absence of his parents in his life. And what I mean by that is his parents were in his life, but they really weren't there to support him or help him. And we see that he is resilient even though he deals with these unfortunate circumstances. And he had a difficult life while he was growing up with his sister. There was lots of abuse that he witnessed between his parents, and also emotional abuse that he later experienced by his mom. That would really make any kid want to give up and not really care about his or her educational success. Eric specifically recalled when his mother drank so much or took drugs that she would cause herself to stay in bed for 3 days in a row, and he and his sister really had very little to eat. His father really was non-existent, and he remembers at the age of 7 that he went and he would go and make Campbell's soup for him and his sister. And he remembers the food stamps and being on welfare. And despite having cockroaches everywhere in his house and no one to care for him, he still managed to get straight A's. He continued to endure this great stress between his parents. And when his mother would drink, she would also drive. And he wasn't sure if he would ever die while he was in these cars with his mother while she was driving. Fortunately and unfortunately, which was really sad in Eric's life, his mom died. He was both sad and relieved. He felt that he would have been in a safer place if he went to go live with his father now that his mother had passed. But when he actually does so, his father really doesn't know how to parent him, and it really isn't until he leaves, because his father can't take care of him, that he is embraced by his aunt and uncle during his high school years, which is where he finally finds the power to bring up his grades, do well in school, and be resilient enough to come back and be successful and make his way to Dartmouth, where he eventually graduates and finds his cultural identity. He had really associated his culture with what his parents had modeled for him, but he then comes to realize that there are many Latino students, adults, who he can look at as role models who are not like his parents. And like I said, his aunt and uncle had a great influence on him, and he remembered his grandmother too. And this quote that you see is him moving in with his new family. And he specifically says, moving in with my new family became the best decision I had ever made. Worrying about being on time to school or having food to eat became things of the past. Consistent love and tenderness were offered in my new household, and I knew that I had finally found my dream home. The constant, steady love and attention that my new parents offered began stripping away the pain from my pre-adolescent years. The tense feeling of apprehension of another chaotic episode being around the corner finally left me for the first time. I could focus my thoughts solely on school, sports, and my identity. And he also recalls how much his grandmother had a great influence in his life, and he remembers her food really taking him out of poverty and depression. And if you recall earlier in the course, we do remember Paul Gorski stating that it's really important we as educators try to help students and really reach out to families and embrace families and help students understand the importance of having family relationships and vice versa, reaching out to family members to help them understand the importance of giving their children support. Unfortunately, Eric's parents couldn't do that, but other family members were able to do that for him. When we move on to the next story that resonated with me, it relates to biculturalism, and this is Jose Garcia and how he really learns to embrace two cultures. Jose's story is one of sadness and happiness. He was made to believe really that being white, because he attended basically all white schools, was better than anything else. And you can see from his story that he has a difficult time dealing with his life and what he experiences, and he has this self-hatred. He seemed to have this deep-rooted hatred for his own culture because he really only associated it with negative things in his life, such as his uncle who was put in prison for taking drugs. His other cousins really hadn't been successful. They dropped out of school. And so he really associates anything with negativity and being Latino. He says, my self-hatred was also hatred of my background and my relatives. My perception of myself and others had been altered by all the new people I met in college. So again, it's not until he actually gets to college that he comes to realize that he should embrace his culture, that there are great role models who are Latino at Dartmouth and great adults other than his peers who are great role models. And he embraces his culture when he joins certain Latino groups at his college, and ultimately he comes to realize that he can embrace that part of his life that he had this great self-hatred for. So this is a great story of him embracing his identity in America and being American, but also embracing that Latino culture that he had negative impressions of during much of his life. The next student who stood out to me was Angelita Urena, and her story was very powerful because her parents had a huge influence in her life. One of her parents had a really negative influence, and then one of her parents had a really positive influence and propelled her to want to be something great in her life. Her grandmother also proved to have a profound impact on her life, but we see as we read through this that a child's life is really shaped by their parents' involvement. We see that Angelina's mother did everything in her power to provide a life where she taught Angelina the importance of studying and working hard in school. She showed this to her daughter through hard work every day and the sacrifices that she made for her daughter, which Angelina never forgot. But unfortunately, her father had basically abandoned her, and her half-sisters treated her horribly to the extent that they were so jealous of her that they actually poured chemicals in her hair so all of her hair would fall out. Luckily, during this time, her mother still stood by her side. Her mother had left her father and really helped Angelina understand that nothing will get in her way and that she could be completely proud of her Dominican status, which is that orgullo dominicana. And she's able to really embrace this when she goes to college. And even though she's very, very poor and her mother really doesn't have a lot to give her, she gives her one of the most important things, which is the ability to see that she could do whatever she wants in her life. And one of the quotes that I pointed out here is from one of our earlier pieces, and we noticed that parental practices that foster healthy physical environments for children are correlated with higher SES, and poverty in turn is associated with parental actions leading to diminished physical environments. Certainly Angelina, if she lived only with her father, may have even possibly died. And she lived in these horrific circumstances where her father mistreated her and her half-sisters abused her. Luckily, her mother got out of that situation, and when she got out of that situation, she was able to flourish and do very well at Dartmouth and recognize how important her culture was, and that she really embraced and really applauded her mother for giving her the power to believe in herself. The last person who I found quite intriguing is Robert Cotto, and this particular student was able to learn how to embrace his Latino culture and really come to terms with his identity as well. And I was especially touched because he really grew up next to me and where I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. And I saw a lot of the main events of his life and what he explained unfold in front of me, and I could really see probably where he was. He went to school outside of Hartford after he was about 7 or 8 years old in a predominantly white school, which caused him to have little or no connection between the content that he was learning in his school and his cultural upbringing. And specifically, he had said, "My mother urged us to do well in school, but I was losing interest in school because I rarely connected with anything being taught or any of the people in my classes." And so he really kind of doesn't totally fit in with the other students. He's Puerto Rican, and even when they find out that he's Puerto Rican, they can't believe it because they just really associate Puerto Rican students with students who get in trouble. But he does recognize that there aren't students who are like him, and it's not really until he goes to Dartmouth where he sees how important it is to embrace his culture. And we also see something that's really important that we read about from the National Association for Multicultural Education, which is that we really need to advocate the belief that students in their life histories and experience should be placed at the center of the teaching and learning process, and that pedagogy should occur in a context that is familiar to students and that addresses multiple ways of thinking. In effect, these students will be able to make connections like Robert wasn't able to do for much of his life, and it caused him to be in a situation where he felt that he was losing interest in school. Luckily, that all changed. He went to Dartmouth, and he came to realize that he could have a great opportunity to become part of the Latino community there and embrace the culture. These are the references that are referred to throughout my project. I would like to say that this book really helped me come to see that, students often struggle with the different circumstances that they're in, especially these Latino students who attended white schools, and they really needed to find a way to fight off adversity when there were students who didn't really understand their culture and had certain bias against certain cultures, or even those students who I had mentioned who only really saw their culture as negative because people in their family hadn't accomplished what some of them thought they should have accomplished. So they had a negative attitude towards their culture until they came to realize that every culture has good and bad, and every culture has something that we absolutely should embrace. And certainly, some of these students weren't able to figure that out until they went to college. But that's the most rewarding part, that they were able to figure that out. My major suggestion for any educational environment is to ensure that the curricula in any school connects to the cultures of the students who are being taught there. And we really need to, as educators, embrace the fact that we do have certain stereotypes and bias and recognize those before we step foot into the classroom, so that we can only positively impact all of the students who we teach on a daily basis. Thank you.